Today we are diving into a truth that is often whispered in the quiet corners of our hearts. There is one emotional mistake that pierces deeper than most, one misstep that lingers in the soul long after words have faded. For those who feel profoundly, those who sense the currents of emotion in ways others cannot, this mistake is unforgettable. It is not the ordinary betrayals, the casual unkindness, or even the harsh words spoken in anger. No, it is subtler yet infinitely more devastating. It is a violation of the trust that exists between hearts, a misalignment with the sacred space where empathy meets understanding. Today, we will explore this truth together, not to dwell in pain, but to awaken our awareness, to learn how to protect our hearts, and to recognize the patterns that keep us bound in emotional cycles. We will confront this mistake, understand why it hurts so deeply, and discover how to rise above it with clarity and grace. Emotional betrayal is not always loud. It does not always come in the form of grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Often it is quiet, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but to a super empath it is seismic. These are individuals whose hearts are finely tuned instruments, capable of perceiving the subtleties of another person's feelings, the unspoken words, the hesitations, the energy that lingers in a room long after a conversation ends. For them, trust is not just an abstract concept, it is a living, breathing entity. It is woven into every interaction, every shared thought, every moment of vulnerability offered without guarantee. When that trust is broken, when the emotional covenant between hearts is violated, the wound cuts deeper than a physical injury ever could. Unlike ordinary mistakes, emotional betrayal carries with it a weight that persists. It is remembered not merely as an event, but as a distortion of what was believed to be sacred. Super empaths carry the echoes of these violations in their bodies, in the way they hold themselves, in the pauses before they speak, in the hesitation to fully open again. It is not about the words themselves, nor always about the actions, but about the alignment, or misalignment, between intent and reception, between what was promised emotionally and what was delivered. When someone they trusted dismisses, manipulates, or disregards their feelings, it resonates through the empath's core. It is a signal, a red flag, a flare that illuminates the boundaries that were crossed, boundaries that were often invisible to everyone else but were sacred to the empath. One of the most devastating aspects of this betrayal is that it is often committed by those closest to the empath, the people who were expected to safeguard their emotional world rather than disrupt it. A friend who shares secrets for selfish gain, a partner who uses vulnerabilities as ammunition, a family member who invalidates feelings instead of embracing them. These are the violators of the empath's trust. The depth of the hurt comes not only from the act itself, but from the shattering of the empath's implicit belief that their emotional world would be respected. When such a belief is broken, it is not merely disappointment. It is a profound shock to the foundation of how they perceive human connection. The consequences of emotional betrayal extend beyond immediate pain. Super empaths are highly sensitive to energy, to tone, to micro-expressions. After betrayal, they may question themselves endlessly, replaying interactions, trying to understand what went wrong, whether they misread the cues, whether they could have prevented the breach. This internalization can lead to patterns of overanalysis, hypervigilance, and a protective emotional armor that is both necessary and costly. The empath learns to build walls not because they wish to, but because the wound is real and the heart seeks safety. Emotional betrayal is transformative in this way. It reshapes perception, rewires emotional responses, and can alter the trajectory of relationships indefinitely. Moreover, the empath is not merely reacting to the breach. They are processing layers of unspoken betrayal, the loss of expected reciprocity, the violation of implicit agreements, the collapse of shared intimacy. They feel the absence of alignment between two souls as a tangible void. It is the experience of being unseen while being fully vulnerable, of being disregarded while being entirely exposed. This is why super empaths rarely forget or forgive such mistakes lightly. Forgiveness is not a casual choice but a profound negotiation with the self, a deliberation over whether to release the charge of pain or to carry it as a reminder of what must never be repeated. In essence, emotional betrayal is the ultimate breach because it assaults the very infrastructure of trust that enables deep human connection. Super empaths navigate life acutely aware of this risk, understanding that their sensitivity is both a gift and a potential vulnerability. Every act of betrayal leaves an imprint, a lesson etched into the emotional memory of the empath. They may grow wiser, more discerning, more capable of recognizing danger before it manifests. Yet the cost is high, for the wound is not superficial. It penetrates the essence of who they are, challenging their capacity to believe in the inherent goodness of others, compelling them to reevaluate the parameters of intimacy, loyalty, and shared humanity. Emotional boundaries are the invisible fences that protect our inner world. For super empaths, they are essential yet often fragile, because their innate openness makes them naturally inclined to absorb the feelings, struggles, and energies of others. When these boundaries are respected, they allow for connection without erosion, intimacy without danger, and love without loss of self. But when ignored by others or even by the empath themselves, the cost is far greater than many realize. Ignoring emotional boundaries is not a minor lapse. It is a subtle invitation for exhaustion, resentment, and deep internal conflict to take root. The first cost of boundary neglect is a gradual depletion of emotional energy. Super empaths, by design, are highly attuned to the emotional states around them. They feel the sorrow of a friend as if it were their own. They absorb the tension in a room as though it pulses through their veins, and they carry the unspoken weight of others with astonishing clarity. Without clear boundaries, this constant inflow of external emotions leaves them perpetually drained as their internal reservoir of strength is slowly siphoned off. It is not simply tiredness, it is a profound fatigue that penetrates body, mind, and spirit. The empath may feel overwhelmed by a sense of responsibility for the happiness, safety, and stability of those around them, often at the expense of their own peace. Another cost is the erosion of self-identity. When emotional boundaries are ignored, the line between one's own feelings and the feelings of others begins to blur. Super empaths may find themselves living not as autonomous beings but as mirrors reflecting the emotions, expectations, and desires of those in their orbit. Over time, this can lead to confusion, self-doubt, and the dangerous assumption that their worth is determined by their ability to manage or heal the emotions of others. Ignoring boundaries effectively teaches the empath that their emotional labor is endless and unrecognized, and without intervention, it becomes a cycle that diminishes personal clarity and confidence. The third consequence manifests in relationships. When boundaries are unclear or disregarded, interactions can become toxic, manipulative, or exploitative. Some individuals unconsciously or consciously take advantage of the empath's generosity and sensitivity. The empath, driven by compassion and often a desire to maintain harmony, may tolerate disrespect, overreach, or emotional intrusion, thinking it is their duty to absorb the strain. This dynamic fosters imbalance, where one person gives endlessly and the other takes freely, unaware or indifferent to the damage being done. Over time, this imbalance corrodes trust, creates resentment, and fosters a sense of invisibility in the empath. They begin to question whether being sensitive is a gift or a liability, and may even withdraw from relationships to protect themselves, further complicating their emotional world. Ignoring emotional boundaries also impacts mental health. Chronic exposure to others' unresolved emotions without protective measures can amplify anxiety, stress, and depression in super empaths. The body reacts to this unrelenting emotional pressure as it would to a physical threat. Muscles tighten, sleep is disrupted, and the nervous system remains on high alert. This is why so many highly sensitive individuals experience psychosomatic symptoms, headache, stomach issues, tension, without realizing that the root cause is prolonged boundary violation. The empath may internalize feelings of guilt or inadequacy, mistakenly believing that their inability to shield themselves is a personal failure rather than a natural response to overexposure. Equally important is the spiritual and emotional toll. Ignoring boundaries clouds judgment and intuition. Super empaths rely on their emotional intelligence to navigate human complexity. It is a compass, not merely a feeling. When overwhelmed by unfiltered emotional input, this compass falters, leading to decisions that are reactive rather than intentional, driven by obligation rather than wisdom. Over time, the empath's connection to their inner guidance, the still, quiet voice that distinguishes truth from manipulation, can weaken, leaving them more susceptible to repeated breaches of trust. The result is a pattern of relational exhaustion and repeated emotional injuries, each one reinforcing the belief that vulnerability is dangerous and connection is perilous. Yet, the lesson of ignored boundaries is not simply cautionary. It is transformative. Recognizing the cost of boundary neglect allows super empaths to reclaim their autonomy, to reassert control over their energy, and to cultivate relationships rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Establishing emotional boundaries is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of preservation, an acknowledgement that the empath's gifts, sensitivity, empathy, and compassion are powerful and must be protected to serve effectively. Boundaries become a framework through which they can continue to give generously without sacrificing their own well-being, ensuring that their energy, love, and presence remain sustainable. When empaths honor boundaries, both in themselves and in others, they create a sanctuary in which emotional exchange is deliberate, conscious, and reciprocal. They can engage fully without fear of depletion, respond rather than react, and choose relationships that nurture rather than drain. Ignoring boundaries, in contrast, perpetuates cycles of emotional chaos, erodes self-worth, and invites repeated harm. Understanding the cost is the first step toward mastering the balance between openness and protection, between compassion and self-preservation, between giving love and safeguarding the soul. Super empaths possess a unique sensitivity that goes far beyond ordinary awareness. It is not just emotional intuition, it is a finely tuned radar capable of detecting subtleties in energy, intention, and behavior that most people overlook entirely. While many may rely solely on words or outward appearances to judge character, super empaths read the space between the lines, the pauses in speech, the micro-expressions that flicker across a face for a fraction of a second, the subtle shift in tone or posture. These signals, invisible to many, register deeply in the empath's body, mind, and spirit, providing insight into the hidden motives of others. This extraordinary perceptiveness is both a gift and a burden. On one hand, it allows super empaths to navigate complex social landscapes with clarity, avoiding situations that could be harmful or toxic. On the other hand, it can make them hyper-aware, constantly analyzing and interpreting the intentions behind every word, every gesture, and every glance. The empath's nervous system is finely attuned to the emotional currents around them, so when someone acts from self-interest, dishonesty, or manipulation, it is felt almost as a vibration in their very bones. Unlike ordinary people who may dismiss subtle signs or rationalize suspicious behavior, super empaths cannot ignore these cues. They resonate at a level that is nearly impossible to suppress. One of the most remarkable aspects of this ability is that it is instinctive rather than deliberate. Super empaths do not necessarily decide to detect hidden motives, they simply perceive them. Their empathy functions as a bridge, connecting them to the unspoken feelings and intentions of others. This is why they often sense when someone is being disingenuous or hiding their true agenda long before anyone else notices. Even in situations where the other person is skilled at masking their intentions with charm, politeness, or rational explanation, the empath feels the discrepancy between the outward presentation and the underlying truth. It is a subtle but undeniable tension, a dissonance that their finely tuned perception cannot ignore. However, this gift also comes with challenges. Being able to sense hidden motives does not mean that the empath can always immediately understand why someone acts the way they do. They may pick up on deceit, self-interest, or emotional manipulation, but comprehending the full context, why a person feels compelled to act that way, what fears or wounds drive their behavior, requires reflection, discernment, and experience. This is where many super empaths struggle. They feel the emotional undercurrents intensely but must resist the urge to react impulsively. Their challenge is to balance awareness with patience, perception with wisdom, and sensitivity with grounded judgment. Moreover, the empath's perception of hidden motives can sometimes create internal conflict. Because they feel the emotional impact of others' intentions so deeply, they may experience anxiety, self-doubt, or hesitation when deciding how to respond. They must navigate the delicate balance between trusting their intuition and giving others the benefit of the doubt. This requires a heightened level of self-awareness, understanding which signals are accurate, which are projections, and which are amplified by their own sensitivities. When mastered, this discernment becomes a powerful tool, allowing super empaths to protect themselves and others while maintaining authentic connections. Super empaths also have a profound ability to sense when motives are mixed or conflicted. Unlike ordinary perception, which may categorize people as good or bad, the empath recognizes complexity. They see the interplay of fear, desire, insecurity, and intention, and can detect when someone is acting partially from love and partially from self-interest, partially from truth and partially from deception. This nuanced understanding enables them to navigate relationships with empathy and clarity, recognizing that human behavior is rarely simple or purely selfish. Importantly, this sensitivity to hidden motives fosters discernment in relationships, partnerships, and community interactions. Super empaths can identify alliances that are authentic, collaborations that are mutually beneficial, and connections that honor integrity. Conversely, they can detect situations where trust is likely to be broken, emotional boundaries disregarded, or manipulation at play. This ability acts as both a compass and a shield, guiding them toward emotionally safe spaces while warning them of potential danger before harm occurs. Ultimately, sensing hidden motives is not about mistrust or suspicion. It is about awareness, clarity, and protection. Super empaths are wired to honor the truth of human emotion, to recognize alignment or misalignment between words and intent, and to respond consciously rather than reactively. This skill allows them to navigate the complex web of human relationships with depth and insight, preserving their own emotional well-being while cultivating meaningful connections built on honesty, respect, and integrity. It is a gift that, when harnessed intentionally, empowers them to engage fully in life without being blindsided by deceit, manipulation, or betrayal, and to honor the sacred responsibility that comes with perceiving the truth beneath the surface of human behavior. Trust is the foundation upon which every meaningful connection is built. For super empaths, trust is not merely an abstract idea, it is a living, breathing force that sustains the emotional and spiritual architecture of their relationships. When trust is broken, it is not just an isolated event. It sends ripples through the empath's entire being, altering the way they perceive themselves, others, and the world around them. The impact is often far-reaching, touching aspects of their identity, their intuition, and even their sense of safety in ways that can be subtle or profound. The first ripple is internal. The empath begins to question their own judgment. When someone they trusted acts in a way that violates emotional safety, a seed of doubt takes root. Was the warning signal there and ignored? Did they misinterpret cues? Were they too open, too vulnerable, too giving? Super empaths by nature absorb the emotional weight of others, and when betrayal occurs, this absorption can lead to self-recrimination. They replay interactions, dissect motives, and analyze intentions endlessly, trying to pinpoint where the alignment between expectation and reality was lost. This introspection is double-edged. It can lead to greater self-awareness, but it can also spiral into overthinking, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. The second ripple extends outward to relationships. Broken trust reshapes the way empaths connect with others. Where once they approached relationships with openness, curiosity, and generosity, they may now approach with caution, walls subtly erected to prevent further harm. This protective mechanism is understandable, but it also alters the dynamic of intimacy. Loved ones may feel the distance, even if the empath does not consciously intend it, and the empath may struggle with guilt over their own defensiveness. Over time, repeated breaches of trust can make empaths guarded, skeptical, or hesitant to fully invest emotionally, which can isolate them from the very connections they deeply desire. Another ripple affects the empath's perception of the world itself. Trust is not only relational, it is existential. When a betrayal occurs, it challenges the empath's sense of safety, fairness, and predictability in life. The world may begin to feel less certain, less reliable, more threatening. Ordinary interactions can be scrutinized for hidden motives. Innocuous statements may be interpreted as potential deceit, and the empath's default posture may shift from openness to vigilance. This heightened sensitivity is adaptive. It is a protective mechanism, but it also creates a tension between the desire for connection and the fear of vulnerability. The empath must learn to navigate this tension without losing their capacity to love, feel, and engage authentically. The ripple effect is not purely negative, however. Each experience of broken trust carries the potential for profound growth and transformation. Super empaths who confront betrayal with awareness can develop deeper emotional resilience, greater discernment, and an expanded capacity for empathy without self-sacrifice. They learn to recognize red flags earlier, to set boundaries more clearly, and to honor their own needs while still offering compassion to others. This is the paradox of the empath's journey. The wound is real, the pain is undeniable, but the lessons derived from it can be empowering. Broken trust can serve as a catalyst for developing inner strength, emotional intelligence, and spiritual maturity. The ripple effect also shapes the empath's sense of self-worth. When trust is violated, it can feel as though a part of the soul has been disregarded or devalued. This experience can lead to questioning one's own value, wondering whether they deserve the betrayal, or whether their sensitivity is a liability rather than a gift. Yet, this moment of rupture is also an opportunity to reclaim self-worth, to affirm that their feelings, boundaries, and integrity are valid, and that betrayal reflects the choices of others, not the value of the empath. Super empaths who learn this lesson emerge with a renewed commitment to honoring themselves, their emotions, and the sacred space they inhabit within every relationship. Another important dimension of the ripple effect is its long-term influence on empathy itself. After experiencing betrayal, empaths may initially hesitate to fully engage with others' emotions. They may fear being manipulated, exploited, or misunderstood. But over time, with reflection and healing, they can channel their heightened perception into more conscious empathy that is discerning, balanced, and anchored in self-awareness. Rather than absorbing every emotion indiscriminately, they learn to offer compassion with boundaries, to engage without losing themselves, and to trust without naivety. Finally, the ripple effect teaches the empath a critical lesson about interconnectedness. Emotional breaches are rarely isolated incidents. They create waves that touch multiple layers of life, relationships, decision-making, mental and physical health, and spiritual alignment. Recognizing these ripples allows the empath to respond with wisdom rather than reactive pain, to cultivate environments that honor their sensitivity, and to engage with the world in ways that are both protective and authentic. The empath learns that while trust is fragile, it is not beyond repair, and that the consequences of betrayal, though profound, can ultimately guide them toward greater clarity, resilience, and alignment with their true self. Super empaths are extraordinary in their capacity to feel, to sense, and to connect with the emotional landscapes of those around them. Their depth of perception is a gift, but it also makes them uniquely susceptible to certain patterns that can leave them vulnerable to manipulation, emotional exhaustion, and betrayal. These patterns are often subtle, rooted in habitual responses developed over a lifetime, and can repeat silently, undermining the empath's peace and stability. Recognizing them is the first step toward breaking the cycle and reclaiming emotional sovereignty. One of the most common patterns is overextension. Super empaths naturally want to help, to soothe, and to absorb the pain of others. This desire to alleviate suffering is noble, but it can become a double-edged sword when it results in neglecting their own emotional needs. By prioritizing everyone else's feelings over their own, empaths inadvertently create an environment in which their boundaries are tested repeatedly. The pattern of over-giving can signal to others that their energy is available without limit, leaving the empath exposed to emotional demands that are draining and sometimes exploitative. Over time, this pattern can reinforce the false belief that their worth is measured by how much they can carry for others, rather than by the authenticity of their own being. Another common vulnerability arises from difficulty asserting boundaries. Many super empaths have been conditioned, consciously or unconsciously, to prioritize harmony and connection over confrontation. They fear that setting clear emotional limits might alienate others or cause disappointment. Yet, without boundaries, they are left defenseless against emotional intrusion. This pattern often manifests in small ways at first: a reluctance to say no, a habit of tolerating disrespect, a tendency to absorb blame for situations they did not cause. These seemingly minor concessions accumulate, leaving the empath vulnerable to deeper violations that are much harder to recover from. The third pattern involves selective trust that is misplaced. Super empaths are intuitive and often sense the energy of those around them, but emotional sensitivity does not make them infallible. They may mistake charm, familiarity, or superficial kindness for genuine alignment. This can lead them to invest trust in individuals whose intentions are inconsistent with the empath's values or emotional needs. The result is often a cycle of disappointment, self-doubt, and reinforced caution. Recognizing this pattern is crucial because while intuition is a powerful tool, discernment, tempered with experience, is necessary to avoid repeated emotional injury. A related pattern is the internalization of others' emotions. Super empaths do not merely observe emotional states, they absorb them, often to the point of feeling responsible for outcomes that are beyond their control. When someone is upset, anxious, or frustrated, the empath may unconsciously take on that emotional weight as if it were their own. This pattern of internalization can create chronic stress, self-blame, and even physical symptoms such as fatigue, tension, or illness. It also clouds the empath's ability to differentiate between their own feelings and the projections of others, making it easier for manipulative individuals to exploit their generosity and sensitivity. Another subtle but powerful pattern is the repetition of relationships that mirror past betrayals or emotional pain. Super empaths often unconsciously seek familiarity in relationships even if it comes at a cost. They may be drawn to individuals who reflect unresolved dynamics from their past, patterns of neglect, dismissal, or conditional love. While this can provide opportunities for healing, it can also reinforce vulnerability if the empath is unaware of the repetition. Awareness of this pattern allows them to break cycles that perpetuate emotional harm, creating space for connections that honor their depth without replicating old wounds. Perfectionism and self-criticism also contribute to vulnerability. Super empaths are deeply attuned to subtle dynamics and often hold themselves to impossible standards in their interactions. They may feel responsible for others' happiness, interpreting perceived failures or lapses as personal shortcomings. This pattern magnifies emotional stress and makes it harder for the empath to respond to betrayal or manipulation with clarity. Instead, they may internalize the hurt, believing it reflects a flaw in themselves rather than a misalignment or violation by another person. Finally, the tendency to suppress anger or discomfort perpetuates vulnerability. Super empaths often prioritize empathy and connection over expressing negative emotions, fearing conflict or disapproval. While this approach may maintain temporary harmony, it creates internal pressure and unresolved tension. Suppression of feelings signals to others that certain behaviors are tolerated, which can inadvertently invite repeated breaches of respect or trust. Learning to express emotions constructively and assertively is essential for breaking this pattern and protecting the empath's emotional integrity. These patterns are not weaknesses. They are natural extensions of the super empath's extraordinary capacity for sensitivity and care. The key is awareness. Recognizing these habitual responses allows empaths to make conscious choices about how to engage with the world, how to establish boundaries, and how to cultivate relationships that honor both their generosity and their vulnerability. By breaking these patterns, super empaths can transform their sensitivity from a source of exposure into a source of strength, creating a life that is emotionally rich, protected, and aligned with their deepest values. Healing for super empaths begins with self-compassion. While their hearts are often attuned to the needs and emotions of others, the practice of turning care inward is essential but frequently overlooked. Super empaths are prone to overgiving, self-criticism, and internalizing the emotional burdens of others, which leaves them exhausted and vulnerable. Without self-compassion, their sensitivity becomes a source of constant strain, and emotional wounds, whether from betrayal, boundary violations, or manipulation, can linger indefinitely. Self-compassion is not a luxury. It is a lifeline, a conscious choice to honor one's own feelings, needs, and limitations while navigating a world that often demands more than one can give. The first dimension of self-compassion is acknowledgement. Super empaths must learn to recognize and validate their own pain, their own fatigue, and their own emotional experiences. Too often empaths minimize their feelings, believing that the suffering of others takes precedence, or that their sensitivity is a burden. Yet, acknowledging one's own emotions is the first step toward healing. It affirms that the empath's experiences are real, legitimate, and deserving of attention. This acknowledgement also allows them to differentiate between their own feelings and those absorbed from others, which is crucial for regaining clarity and emotional stability. Acceptance is the second pillar of self-compassion. Super empaths may struggle with self-blame when emotional boundaries are crossed or trust is violated. They may replay interactions endlessly, questioning their judgment, intuition, or worth. Acceptance involves recognizing that pain, mistakes, and emotional breaches are part of the human experience, not evidence of personal inadequacy. It is a gentle reminder that being sensitive and caring does not make one weak. It makes one human. Acceptance allows the empath to release the harsh internal dialogue that perpetuates suffering and opens the door to emotional restoration. A third dimension is nurturing oneself through restorative practices. Super empaths often give outwardly without replenishing their inner resources. Self-compassion includes taking intentional steps to restore emotional and physical energy, whether through solitude, reflection, creative expression, or self-care rituals. These practices are not selfish indulgences. They are necessary mechanisms for sustaining the empath's capacity to give wisely. By prioritizing self-care, empaths signal to themselves and the world that their well-being is important, creating a foundation for healthier boundaries and more sustainable relationships. Forgiveness toward oneself is another critical aspect of self-compassion. Super empaths may carry guilt or regret over situations where they feel they failed emotionally, either by trusting the wrong person, overextending themselves, or internalizing another's pain. Self-forgiveness is a conscious act of releasing self-judgment and embracing the lessons learned from these experiences. It allows the empath to honor their own growth and resilience while freeing themselves from the cycles of blame and regret that otherwise inhibit healing. Forgiveness does not erase mistakes, but it transforms them into catalysts for wisdom, clarity, and emotional strength. Self-compassion also enhances discernment. When empaths cultivate a kind and attentive relationship with themselves, they are better able to recognize patterns, identify boundaries that need reinforcement, and make choices that protect their energy. This inner clarity empowers them to engage with others consciously rather than reactively, allowing their empathy to function as a conscious gift rather than a source of vulnerability. Compassion toward oneself strengthens the capacity to detect when trust may be at risk, when energy is being drained unnecessarily, or when relationships no longer serve mutual growth. Another critical function of self-compassion is resilience. Emotional betrayal, manipulation, and boundary violations are inevitable experiences in life, even for the most sensitive individuals. Without self-compassion, these events can leave deep, lasting wounds that erode confidence and optimism. With self-compassion, empaths are able to process hurt without self-condemnation, to heal without internalized shame, and to re-engage with the world without fear. Provides the empath with an anchor, a steady base from which to navigate emotional turbulence while preserving inner peace. Finally, self-compassion fosters authentic self-expression. Super empaths often suppress their own needs or emotions to accommodate others, which can lead to resentment or disconnection from their true selves. By cultivating self-compassion, they allow their authentic voice, feelings, and desires to be expressed safely and constructively. This authenticity strengthens relationships by fostering mutual respect, reinforces boundaries by clarifying emotional priorities, and nurtures a sense of wholeness that cannot be undermined by external betrayal or manipulation. In essence, self-compassion is the central pillar upon which the healing of a super empath rests. It transforms sensitivity from a source of vulnerability into a source of power, resilience, and clarity. Through acknowledgement, acceptance, nurturing, forgiveness, discernment, resilience, and authentic expression, super empaths reclaim their emotional sovereignty. They learn to protect their hearts while continuing to give generously, to love without losing themselves, and to navigate life's emotional complexities with balance, wisdom, and grace. Super empaths possess an extraordinary sensitivity that allows them to perceive the emotional undercurrents of those around them. This gift, when paired with awareness and discernment, provides an invaluable ability, the capacity to recognize subtle warning signs before damage occurs. These signs are often faint, almost imperceptible, yet they carry profound meaning. They are the whispered alerts from intuition, the fleeting micro-expressions, the tiny shifts in energy that signal misalignment between words, intentions, and actions. Learning to identify these early indicators allows super empaths to act consciously, establish boundaries proactively, and prevent deep emotional harm. The first subtle sign is inconsistency in behavior. When someone's words and actions fail to align even in small ways, a super empath often senses the incongruence immediately. It may be a promise that is occasionally forgotten, a gesture of care that feels obligatory rather than genuine, or a statement that conflicts with past behavior. For the empath, these inconsistencies are not trivial. They resonate as internal alarms, signaling that intentions may not be fully transparent. Recognizing these patterns early is critical because repeated inconsistencies often precede breaches of trust or manipulation, allowing the empath to protect their energy before deep emotional damage takes place. Another subtle sign is emotional misalignment. Super empaths are attuned to the emotional tone of a space and the authenticity of those around them. They notice when someone's emotional expression does not match the content of their words. A forced smile, a tone of voice that belies the sentiment expressed, or a sense of tension beneath an otherwise calm exterior. These misalignments are often overlooked by most, but for the empath they are deeply telling. They indicate an internal conflict, a hidden agenda, or unresolved emotional issues that could impact the relationship. By tuning into these subtle cues, super empaths can anticipate challenges and respond in ways that safeguard their emotional well-being. Microexpressions are another critical indicator. Super empaths often catch fleeting facial expressions, a quick flash of sadness, anger, fear, or impatience that pass in less than a second. These microexpressions provide insight into what a person is truly feeling beneath the surface. While words can be crafted to deceive, microexpressions are involuntary and difficult to control. By observing these subtle signals, Empaths gain access to a deeper layer of understanding, allowing them to assess whether trust is warranted or whether caution is necessary. Energy shifts are equally important. Super empaths perceive changes in energy that others might dismiss. A person may enter a room with calm energy but leave with tension radiating in subtle ways. The empath may feel heaviness, restlessness, or unease in their own body when interacting with certain individuals. These energy shifts serve as early warning systems, indicating that boundaries may be tested or that emotional demands are being placed without reciprocity. Recognizing these shifts allows the empath to adjust their engagement, create protective boundaries, or step back when necessary. Language patterns also provide clues. Super empaths notice when communication is manipulative, vague, or inconsistent. Phrases that imply guilt, overuse of flattery, or attempts to elicit emotional responses can signal hidden motives. While some individuals are unaware of these behaviors, super empaths feel their emotional impact and understand their significance. By paying attention to these subtle verbal cues, empaths can anticipate potential conflicts or exploitation before they escalate. Intuition is the final and most powerful guide. While all the subtle signs, the micro-expressions, energy shifts, emotional misalignments, and linguistic patterns offer concrete indicators, intuition integrates them into a coherent sense of what is happening beneath the surface. For the super empath, intuition is not a vague feeling, it is a precise, deeply embodied awareness. It acts as a compass, pointing to potential risks and revealing the emotional truths that are not spoken aloud. Developing trust in this intuition is essential for preventing harm and navigating relationships with clarity and safety. Recognizing subtle signs is not about suspicion or paranoia, it is about empowerment. Super empaths who cultivate this awareness can make conscious choices about how to engage, whom to trust, and when to step back. This foresight allows them to preserve their emotional energy, protect their boundaries, and maintain the integrity of their relationships. It transforms sensitivity from a source of vulnerability into a source of strength, providing a roadmap for navigating complex human interactions with confidence and clarity. Ultimately, early recognition of subtle signs equips super empaths with the tools to act proactively rather than reactively. It allows them to honor their gift of sensitivity while protecting themselves from betrayal, manipulation, and emotional exhaustion. By attuning to these cues, they create a life in which empathy is a strength, discernment is practiced consciously, and emotional integrity is preserved. Super empaths learn that the world communicates in whispers before it shouts, and by listening carefully, they can avoid pain, cultivate healthy connections, and step into their power with awareness and grace. Pain is inevitable for those who feel deeply. Super empaths experience life at an intensity that most cannot comprehend. When trust is broken, boundaries ignored, or emotions misaligned, the wound is not merely external, it penetrates the core of their being. Yet, within this pain lies the seed of resilience. Emotional resilience is not the absence of suffering, it is the capacity to endure, adapt, and grow stronger through adversity. For super empaths, transforming pain into resilience is both a necessity and a gift, a process that allows them to continue to engage deeply with life without being consumed by it. The first step in this transformation is acknowledgement. Pain must be recognized and honored, not ignored or minimized. Super empaths are often tempted to rationalize or suppress their emotional experiences, believing that the feelings of others are more important than their own. However, unacknowledged pain festers, creating patterns of emotional depletion and vulnerability. By consciously acknowledging hurt, the empath begins to reclaim ownership of their emotional world, naming the source of their suffering and giving themselves permission to feel fully. This acknowledgement is not passive. It is an active engagement with the reality of their experience, and it lays the foundation for resilience. Next comes acceptance. Accepting pain does not mean condoning the actions that caused it, nor does it mean surrendering to victimhood. Instead, acceptance is the recognition that life contains challenges, that relationships may fail, and that betrayal and disappointment are part of the human journey. Super empaths who practice acceptance learn to separate the occurrence of pain from their sense of self-worth. They understand that being hurt does not make them weak or unworthy, it makes them human. Acceptance transforms resistance into clarity, reducing the emotional friction that amplifies suffering and opening the door to conscious healing. Reflection is another critical component. Super empaths are innately introspective, and when guided intentionally, reflection becomes a powerful tool for resilience. By examining experiences of pain, empaths can identify patterns, understand boundaries that need strengthening, and discern lessons embedded in adversity. Reflection allows them to convert emotional discomfort into actionable insights. Each experience becomes a teacher, each betrayal or violation a lesson in discernment, boundary setting, and self-awareness. Over time, these reflections accumulate into a framework of wisdom that empowers the empath to navigate future challenges with greater clarity and confidence. Integration is the stage where resilience is actively built. Super empaths learn to incorporate the lessons of pain into their daily lives, adjusting their interactions, reinforcing boundaries, and cultivating self-compassion. They begin to recognize their emotional triggers, anticipate potential risks, and respond proactively rather than reactively. This integration transforms past suffering into strength, enabling empaths to maintain their sensitivity while protecting their well-being. It allows them to continue giving, loving, and connecting deeply without repeating the same vulnerabilities that once led to hurt. Another essential aspect of building resilience is cultivating supportive relationships. Super empaths thrive when surrounded by individuals who respect their boundaries, honor their emotions, and reciprocate their care. Pain often reveals which relationships are authentic and which are draining. By leaning into connections that are nurturing and mutually respectful, empaths reinforce their sense of safety, restore their emotional energy, and model for themselves what healthy, sustaining relationships look like. These connections become a source of reinforcement, reminding the empath that they are not alone, and that their sensitivity is a strength, not a liability. Resilience also requires the conscious release of what cannot be controlled. Super empaths are naturally attuned to the emotions and behaviors of others, but they must recognize the limits of their influence. They cannot change the choices, intentions, or actions of those who violate trust or cross boundaries. By releasing the need for control over others' behaviors, empaths free themselves from unnecessary suffering and conserve energy for what they can influence: their own responses, boundaries, and personal growth. This release is an act of empowerment, transforming frustration into clarity and helplessness into agency. Finally, the practice of self-compassion amplifies resilience. Super empaths who nurture themselves, forgive themselves, and honor their emotional depth are better equipped to transform pain into strength. Self-compassion acts as both shield and scaffold. It protects the empath from being consumed by hurt while supporting the reconstruction of their emotional and spiritual framework. Through self-compassion, they internalize the truth that their sensitivity is a gift. Their experiences are meaningful, and their journey, though fraught with challenges, can be navigated with grace, wisdom, and courage. Ultimately, transforming pain into emotional resilience is not a single act but a continuous process. It involves acknowledgement, acceptance, reflection, integration, supportive relationships, release, and self-compassion. For super empaths, this transformation allows sensitivity to become a source of power rather than vulnerability. They learn to engage fully with life, to trust wisely, to protect their hearts, and to extend their empathy without sacrificing themselves. Through this journey, the empath emerges stronger, wiser, and more aligned with their true essence, demonstrating that even the deepest pain can be transformed into enduring strength, profound understanding, and a resilient capacity for love.